A calming bedtime story for deep sleep. Close your eyes, if you'd like to. Tonight, we're going somewhere quiet. A small stretch of coastline in Maine, where the land runs out into gray rock, and a white lighthouse stands alone against the sky. This is the story of Walter, the keeper of that lighthouse, on the last night before he retires. It is just past 7 in the evening. The sun has gone down behind the pines, and the sky is fading from orange, to lavender, to a soft, deep blue. Walter climbs the spiral staircase of the lighthouse, slowly, the way he always does. His hand rests on the worn wooden rail, smooth from 40 years of palms just like his. One step. Then another. The stairs creak gently beneath him, an old, familiar sound, like the lighthouse breathing. At the top, the lamp room is quiet and cool. Walter checks the great lens, wiping a small smudge from the glass with a soft cloth. He has done this every evening for 40 years. Tonight, it feels the same as the first night. Calm. Simple. Right. He lights the lamp. A warm, golden glow spreads slowly across the room, and then out across the water, sweeping in its slow, familiar rhythm. Around. And around. And around. Out on the dark water, far in the distance, a single fishing boat moves toward harbor, guided home by the light. Walter watches it for a while. He does not think of much. Just the boat. Just the light. Just the soft, steady sound of the waves below. He makes his way back down the stairs to the small kitchen at the base of the lighthouse. The kettle is already on the stove, the way he left it. He lights the burner, and waits. While the water warms, he opens the old logbook on the table. Its pages are soft and worn at the corners. He runs his finger down the column of dates, all the way back to his very first entry, decades ago. October 3rd, clear skies. Light wind from the north, He smiles, just slightly, and closes the book. The kettle begins to hum, low and quiet, and then to whistle, gentle and far away, like it doesn't want to disturb the night either. Walter pours the hot water over a tea bag in his old chipped mug, the blue one with a small anchor painted on the side. He wraps both hands around it, feeling the warmth seep into his fingers. Outside, the foghorn sounds, low and slow, rolling out across the water. A pause. And then again. It is a sound he has heard 10,000 times. Tonight, it sounds like an old friend, saying goodnight. He sits in his chair by the window, the same chair he has sat in for 40 years. The wood creaks softly as he settles into it. Fog begins to drift in from the sea, slow and silver, curling around the base of the lighthouse like a quiet tide. The light above continues its steady sweep. Around and around. Walter sips his tea. The warmth spreads through his chest, slow and comforting. He thinks back, gently, the way you do when there's nowhere else to be. He remembers the sailors who used to stop by on calm evenings, trading stories for cups of coffee. He remembers storms that rattled the windows, and how the light never once went out, not in 40 years. He remembers quiet mornings, watching the sun rise pink and gold over calm water. None of these memories rush at him. They drift, slow and easy, like the fog outside the window. One memory comes to him slowly, the way they do late at night. A summer evening, many years ago, when a young sailor knocked on the lighthouse door, lost in a sudden fog. Walter remembers making him coffee, the same way he makes his tea now, slow and unhurried. They sat together at this very table, saying little, listening to the foghorn, waiting for the fog to lift. By morning, the sky was clear, and the young sailor went on his way, waving once from his boat before disappearing around the point. Walter never learned his name. It did not seem to matter. Another memory drifts in, softer than the last. A winter storm, decades ago now, when the wind howled around the lighthouse for 3 days straight. The windows rattled in their frames. The waves climbed higher than he had ever seen them, white and furious against the rocks. But the lamp never went out. Walter remembers climbing the stairs every few hours, just to check, just to be sure, his hand steady on the old wooden rail. On the third morning, the wind finally settled. The sea grew calm again, as it always does, eventually. He remembers standing at the top of the lighthouse that morning, tired, but quietly proud. The light had held. It always held. He remembers, too, the quiet seasons. Autumn evenings when the maples along the shore turned gold and red, and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke. Spring mornings when the gulls returned, circling and calling above the rocks. Long summer days when children from the village would wave up at him from the beach, and he would wave back, slow and warm, from the gallery at the top of the tower. Each season came. Each season passed. The light kept turning through all of them. He remembers, most of all, the ordinary nights. Nights with no storms, no lost sailors, nothing to mark them as different from any other. Just the lamp, turning. Just the waves, moving in and out below. Just Walter, in his chair, with his tea, watching the dark water and the small, far-off lights of boats finding their way home. It was never the dramatic nights he loved most. It was these. The quiet ones. The ones like tonight. A new memory rises, unhurried, the way driftwood rises slowly to the surface of calm water. It is an early spring morning, many years ago, and Walter is much younger then, new to the lighthouse, still learning its sounds and its moods. He remembers waking before dawn, the sky outside still a deep, soft gray, and climbing the stairs simply to watch the light fade as morning arrived. The lamp turning around and around. Slower now, as the sun rose and took over its work. He remembers thinking, even then, in those early days, that this was a job built entirely out of patience. Not excitement. Not urgency. Just patience, and care, and showing up, night after night, for the people out on the water who needed a steady light to follow home. He has never once regretted choosing it. He thinks of his wife, Margaret, gone some years now, who used to sit in the chair across from his, knitting quietly while he read the logbook by lamplight. She never minded the isolation of this place. She used to say the lighthouse had its own kind of company. The waves. The gulls. The slow turning of the light. He remembers her laugh, warm and easy, filling the small kitchen on evenings when the wind outside howled and the kettle whistled and neither of them had anywhere else they needed to be. He misses her in a quiet way now, not sharp, not painful, just present, the way the fog is present, settling softly around the edges of his thoughts. He sips his tea, and lets the memory rest there, gently, beside him. Further back, he remembers his own father, who was a fisherman, not a keeper, but who taught him to read the sky and the water long before Walter ever set foot in a lighthouse. His father used to say that the sea was patient, and that anyone who worked beside it had to learn to be patient too. Walter remembers standing on the docks as a boy, no older than 7 or 8, watching his father's boat disappear into the morning mist, and waiting, simply waiting, for it to reappear hours later, safe, full of the day's catch. He thinks now that perhaps this is where it started. This long, slow comfort with waiting. With watching. With trusting that what is out there in the dark will, in time, find its way home. The fog outside has thickened further, pressing soft and silver against the windows. Walter's tea has gone lukewarm in his hands, but he does not mind. He sets the mug down on the small table beside his chair, the same spot it has rested in 1,000 times before, and lets his hands fall quietly into his lap. The foghorn sounds again, low, distant, patient. A pause. Then again. He counts the seconds between each call, the way he always has, an old habit from his first year here, when every sound still felt new and worth noticing. 12 seconds. Then the horn. 12 seconds. Then the horn again. A steady, unhurried rhythm, like the lighthouse itself breathing slow, even breaths into the night. He thinks of the harbor town beyond the point, sleeping now under the same fog. The small grocery with its faded awning. The church with its white steeple, just visible on clear days from the top of the tower. The diner where he used to take Margaret on Sunday mornings, back when his knees allowed for the walk into town and back. He pictures it all exactly as it always was, quiet streets, porch lights left on, a soft glow in a window here, and there were someone else is awake too, doing the same small, unremarkable things people do at the end of a long day. Somewhere in that town, someone is washing the last dish of the evening. Somewhere, someone is pulling a blanket up over a sleeping child. Somewhere, someone is doing exactly what Walter is doing now, sitting quietly, letting the day settle, waiting for sleep to come on its own time. He remembers a particular October, many autumns ago, when a pod of whales passed close to shore, their backs breaking the surface in slow, rolling arcs just beyond the rocks. He had watched them for nearly an hour from the gallery at the top of the lighthouse, the lamp turning steadily behind him, the whales moving with the same unhurried patience as everything else in this place. He remembers thinking that even the largest creatures in the sea did not rush. They simply moved, slow and certain, toward wherever they were going. He has tried, in his own way, to live like that. Slow. Certain. Unbothered by the urgency that seems to drive so much of the world beyond this small stretch of coast. The chair creaks softly as he shifts, just slightly, settling deeper into its familiar shape. Outside, the tide is beginning to turn, the waves drawing back, then forward, then back again, in their long, slow conversation with the shore. Walter's breathing has slowed to match it, without his noticing. In and out. Like the waves. Like the lamp. Like the whole quiet rhythm of this place that has shaped the last 40 years of his life. He remembers his very last official entry in the logbook, written just an hour ago, before he came down to make his tea. Asterisk final night. Clear visibility. Calm seas. All is well, asterisk. For words that mean everything, and nothing more than they say. All is well. It is, he thinks, the only thing he has ever really needed to write. 40 years of nights, and in the end, it always came down to those same 3 words. All is well. He thinks, briefly, of tomorrow, when the new keeper arrives, a young woman named Claire who came by last week to learn the lamp, the logbook, the small rituals of this place. He remembers her careful questions, her steady hands on the old brass fittings, the quiet respect in her voice when she asked him what it had been like, all these years. He had told her simply, peaceful. It had been peaceful. He hopes it will be the same for her. He thinks she will take good care of the light. His eyelids grow heavier still. The fog presses softly against the glass. The foghorn sounds once more, further away now, or perhaps the room has simply grown quieter around him. He does not fight the tiredness. He has learned, over 40 years, not to fight anything that comes this gently. He drifts, for a moment, into half-sleep, and in that soft, hazy space, more memories rise, looser now, less ordered, the way thoughts tend to wander just before real sleep arrives. He remembers the smell of paint, fresh and sharp, the summer he repainted the tower himself, climbing the scaffolding slowly, rung by rung, taking 3 full days over a job that might have taken 1, simply because he liked the rhythm of it. He remembers the particular blue of the sky that week, cloudless and enormous, stretching out over calm water all the way to the horizon. He remembers Margaret bringing him sandwiches at noon, sitting on the rocks below, watching him work, telling him to be careful, though she knew he always was. He remembers, too, the winter the harbor froze at its edges, thin sheets of ice forming along the rocks, cracking and shifting with the tide. He remembers walking down to check on it each morning, his boots crunching over frosted grass, his breath visible in the cold air. He remembers how quiet everything became in that kind of cold, how even the gulls seemed to speak more softly, how the whole coastline seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for spring. Spring came, as it always does. It always does. He remembers a summer night when the sky filled with more stars than he had ever seen, the Milky Way stretched clear and bright above the dark water, no moon to compete with it. He had turned off every light in the keeper's house except the lamp itself, and sat outside on the rocks for hours, simply looking up. He remembers thinking that the lighthouse and the stars were doing the same quiet work, each in their own way, each a small steady point of light in a vast, dark space, each there for anyone who needed to find their way. He remembers autumn storms that came in fast and left just as quickly, leaving the air washed clean and the light unusually sharp and golden in their aftermath. He remembers standing at the top of the tower after one such storm, watching a double rainbow arc over the water, the colors so vivid they seemed almost unreal. He had no one to share it with that particular afternoon, Margaret having gone into town for groceries, but he remembers feeling, even alone, that it did not matter. The rainbow did not need an audience to be beautiful. It simply was. He thinks of all the boats he has guided home over the years, more than he could ever count, fishing vessels and sailboats and the occasional lost pleasure craft that strayed too close to the rocks in fog. He does not remember most of their names, or their captains' faces. But he remembers, in a general, warm way, the feeling of watching them safely round the point each time, the quiet satisfaction of work well done, simple and unglamorous, but necessary. He has never needed recognition for it. The light doing its job, night after night, has always felt like enough. His thoughts slow further, the edges of each memory softening into the next, the way fog blurs the line between sea and sky until you can no longer tell where one ends and the other begins. He thinks of warm bread, and quiet mornings, and Margaret's laugh, and his father's boat disappearing into morning mist, and Claire's careful hands on the brass fittings, and the whales rolling slow through gray water, and the rainbow over the rocks, and 10,000 nights of the lamp turning, around, and around, and around. Somewhere outside, very faint now, the foghorn sounds once more. He barely hears it. His tea sits forgotten and cold on the small table beside him. The fog continues to drift past the windows, soft and silver, patient as it has always been. The lamp above continues its slow, steady rotation, sweeping its warm light out across calm, dark water. Around. And around. And around. His breathing has grown slow and even, deep and unhurried, matching the gentle rhythm of the waves below. His hands rest loosely in his lap. His head leans gently against the worn fabric of the old chair. There is nowhere else he needs to be. There is nothing left to check, nothing left to fix, nothing left to wait for. All is well. In the soft space between waking and sleep, another memory surfaces, slow and unhurried. He remembers the day the new lens arrived, decades ago now, shipped up from Boston in a wooden crate nearly as tall as he was. He remembers the careful work of installing it, 3 men from the Lighthouse service guiding him through each step, the way the old lens was retired and the new one set gently into place, polished and gleaming in the afternoon light. He remembers standing back, once it was done, and watching it catch the last of the sun, throwing small rainbows across the walls of the lamp room. It had felt, that day, like meeting something he would spend the rest of his life getting to know. 40 years later, he still discovers something new in the way the light bends through that old glass. He thinks of the small garden Margaret kept behind the keeper's house, a patch of soil no bigger than a kitchen table, where she grew tomatoes and herbs and, every June, a small row of sunflowers that turned their faces toward the lighthouse as if it were their own private sun. He remembers watching her kneel in the dirt on warm mornings, her sun hat tilted back, humming something soft and tuneless to herself. He remembers the smell of basil on his hands after helping her harvest it. He remembers thinking, even then, that there was nowhere in the world he would rather be than in that small garden, on that small patch of coast, with her. He remembers winters when supplies ran low before the next boat could make it out, and how he and Margaret would ration carefully, never quite worried, simply patient, the way the whole of their life here had taught them to be. He remembers candlelit dinners during power outages, the 2 of them laughing over simple meals, the storm howling outside, the lamp still turning above them, powered by its own separate generator, faithful even when everything else in the house had gone dark. He remembers thinking that as long as the light still turned, nothing else mattered very much. A memory of childhood drifts in now, soft and golden at the edges. He remembers visiting his grandmother's house on the coast of Maine, much further north than where he keeps his own lighthouse now, and falling asleep most nights to the sound of a foghorn very much like the one outside his window tonight. He remembers his grandmother telling him, when he was very small, that lighthouses were built by people who understood that the kindest thing you could do for a stranger was to leave a light on for them. He had never forgotten that. He thinks, now, that it became the whole shape of his life. He remembers the first ship he ever guided safely through a storm on his own, just weeks into the job, barely 20 years old, terrified that he might fail at the one task that mattered most. He remembers climbing the stairs every 20 minutes that night, checking the lamp obsessively, watching the small fishing boat fight its way through enormous swells toward the safety of the harbor. He remembers the moment it finally rounded the point, into calmer water, and the wave of relief that had nearly buckled his knees. He had gone to bed that night utterly exhausted, and utterly certain, for the first time, that he had chosen the right life. He remembers, too, quieter satisfactions. The first time he fixed the old generator himself, without calling for help from the mainland. The summer he taught a young boy from the village how the lens worked, watching the boy's eyes widen as the beam swept slowly across the water. The afternoon he found an injured gull on the rocks, and nursed it back to health over 3 patient weeks, releasing it finally from the gallery at the top of the tower, watching it circle once before flying off toward the open sea. Small things. Quiet things. The kind of things a whole life can be built from, one patient day at a time. The fog outside continues its slow drift past the windows. The foghorn, when it sounds now, seems to come from somewhere very far away, soft and rounded at the edges, like a sound heard underwater. Walter's breathing remains slow, and even, and deep. The tea on the table beside him has long gone cold. The logbook rests closed, its final entry already written. All is well. He thinks, briefly, hazily, of all the keepers who came before him in this same lighthouse, stretching back over 100 years, each of them sitting, at some point, in a chair very much like this one, watching the same lamp turn, listening to the same waves, thinking their own quiet thoughts at the end of their own long days. He feels, in this drowsy moment, less like the last keeper of something ending, and more like one small link in a long, slow chain of people who simply showed up, night after night, to keep a light burning for whoever needed it. Tomorrow, Claire will become the next link in that chain. The light will keep turning. It always does. Outside, the first, faintest hint of gray begins to soften the black sky far out over the water, though it will be hours yet before real dawn arrives. The waves continue their slow work against the rocks, patient, unhurried, the way they always have been. The lamp sweeps its warm light out across the dark water. Around. And around. And around. In the deep quiet of half-sleep, another memory rises, slow as the tide. He remembers a particular Christmas Eve, many years back, when a sudden snowstorm cut the lighthouse off from the mainland for nearly a week. He remembers Margaret stringing small paper stars along the kitchen window, humming carols softly while snow piled high against the door. He remembers the two of them sharing a small roasted chicken meant for four, content with what they had, grateful for the warmth of the stove and the steady turning of the lamp above them. He remembers waking on Christmas morning to a world entirely white, the rocks below buried under drifts, the sea beyond strangely calm and silver under a pale winter sun. It remains, even now, one of his favorite mornings of his whole life. He remembers, too, the year a young family moved into the keeper's cottage on the next point over, their two children often rowing across on calm afternoons to visit, peppering him with questions about the lamp, the lens, the logbook, the foghorn. He remembers teaching the older child, a girl no more than 10, how to wind the old clockwork mechanism that once turned the lens before electricity came to this stretch of coast. He remembers her face, lit with quiet wonder, as the gears clicked slowly into motion beneath her small hands. He often wonders, now, whether she remembers any of it. He hopes, in a quiet way, that she does. He thinks of long summer evenings when he would sit outside on the rocks after his work was done, simply watching the sun set slowly into the water, the sky shifting through every shade of orange and pink and violet before settling, finally, into the deep blue of night. He remembers how unhurried those sunsets always felt, how the sky seemed to take its time, the way everything along this coast seemed to take its time, the tides, the seasons, the slow turning of the lamp. He has never once felt the need to rush any of it. A memory of a quiet rainy afternoon drifts in now, soft and gray at the edges. He remembers sitting by the kitchen window with a cup of coffee, watching rain fall steadily into the sea, the horizon blurred into a single soft gray line where water met sky. He remembers reading old letters that day, ones Margaret had written him during a brief separation early in their marriage, before she came to live with him here permanently. Her handwriting, looping and familiar, describing how much she missed the sound of the foghorn, how strange it felt to fall asleep without it. He remembers smiling at that, remembering how strange it had felt to him too, those few weeks she was away, the lighthouse oddly quiet without her laughter filling its small rooms. He remembers the autumn the harbor seals began appearing regularly on the rocks below, sunning themselves in the pale morning light, barking occasionally at passing gulls. He remembers naming a few of them, quietly, privately, never telling anyone, simply for his own amusement during long, solitary mornings. He remembers one seal in particular, with a notch in its tail, who returned year after year, until Walter began to think of its arrival each autumn as a small, reliable marker of the changing season, as dependable as the turning leaves or the shortening days. He wonders, idly, in this drowsy moment, whether it will return again this year, and whether Claire will notice it, and give it a name of her own. He thinks of the long, slow process of learning every sound this lighthouse makes. The particular creak of the third stair from the top. The low hum of the generator when it first kicks on. The way the wind whistles differently through the north-facing window depending on the season. He remembers how, in his first months here, every sound startled him, kept him awake, alert, uncertain. He remembers how, slowly, over months and then years, each sound became familiar, then comforting, then almost invisible, woven so completely into the fabric of his days that he no longer noticed them at all, except in moments like this one, when he lets himself notice everything, slowly, one small sound at a time. He remembers, very faintly now, almost as if from a great distance, the many ordinary breakfasts he shared with Margaret at the small kitchen table, oatmeal in winter, fresh eggs in summer, the newspaper arriving days late by boat, read anyway, slowly, over second cups of coffee. He remembers her reading him the headlines in a mock-serious voice, making him laugh before he had even finished his first sip. He remembers thinking, on so many of those ordinary mornings, that he could not imagine a fuller life than this one, small as it was, quiet as it was, lived almost entirely within sight of this one small stretch of rock and water and sky. The fog outside has begun, very slowly, to thin. Through the window, faint shapes are becoming visible again, the dark line of the horizon, the pale gleam of foam where waves meet rock. The foghorn sounds once more, fainter still, as though it too is growing tired, ready to rest. Walter's breathing remains slow and deep, untroubled, the rhythm of a man entirely at peace with where he is, and where he has been, and where, tomorrow, he will finally allow himself to rest for good. The lamp continues its patient work above him, sweeping its warm light out across water that is, slowly, beginning to soften from black to the deepest, darkest blue. Around. And around. And around. There is nothing left to do tonight but rest. Nothing left to check. Nothing left to wait for. In this soft, drifting place between waking and sleep, another memory comes to him, unhurried, like a small boat coming in on a gentle tide. He remembers the spring a pair of ospreys built a nest on the old navigation marker just beyond the point, and how he watched, morning after morning, as they raised 3 chicks over the course of the season. He remembers the particular thrill of seeing the young birds take their first clumsy flights, wobbling out over the water before finding their balance, circling back toward the nest, again and again, growing steadier each time. He remembers thinking that there was something familiar in that, something he recognized from his own life, the slow, patient process of learning to do something difficult simply by doing it, over and over, until one day it no longer felt difficult at all. He remembers the autumn evening he found an old glass fishing float washed up on the rocks, green and weathered, smooth from decades in the sea. He remembers turning it over in his hands, wondering where it had come from, how many years it had drifted, how many storms it had survived before finding its way to this particular stretch of shore. He kept it on the windowsill of the kitchen for the rest of his time here, and even now, all these years later, he can picture exactly how the morning light passed through it, throwing a small circle of pale green onto the table below. Small things. Simple things. The kind of things that, over 40 years, come to mean far more than their size would suggest. He thinks of the many nights he spent simply listening, not watching, not working, just listening to the particular voice of the sea in different kinds of weather. The hush of calm water on a still summer night. The sharper slap of waves against rock before a coming storm. The long, slow roar of a storm in full force, the kind that used to keep him awake not from worry, but from a kind of awe. He remembers thinking that the sea had as many voices as a person, and that learning to recognize each one had been one of the quiet pleasures of this long, slow life. A memory rises now of an early morning swim, taken on a whim one warm July, decades ago, before the world outside had properly woken. He remembers the shock of the cold water, the way it cleared his mind entirely, leaving nothing but the present moment, the slap of waves against his shoulders, the wide, pale sky above him, the lighthouse standing tall and white against the morning light. He remembers floating on his back for a long while, simply looking up, feeling entirely, completely at peace. He never made a habit of it, that swim, but he has never forgotten how it felt. He remembers, too, the year the old wooden rowboat finally gave out, its hull too worn and waterlogged to patch any further, and how he and Margaret gave it a small, informal funeral of sorts, towing it out past the point and letting it go, watching it drift slowly out of sight toward the horizon. It had seemed, at the time, like a strange thing to feel sentimental about, an old boat, nothing more. But he remembers Margaret crying a little, and remembers, himself, feeling a lump in his throat he had not expected, and understanding, in that moment, that a life lived slowly in one place gathers its sentiment in small, unexpected corners. A boat. A chair. A chipped blue mug with an anchor painted on its side. He thinks of the many nights he spent teaching himself, slowly, patiently, the names of the constellations visible from this stretch of coast, using an old, dog-eared star chart that had come with the lighthouse, passed down from keeper to keeper for generations before him. He remembers tracing Orion's belt with his finger on cold winter nights, the air sharp and clear, his breath fogging in front of him. He remembers the particular satisfaction of finally being able to find each constellation without the chart, simply by looking up, the sky as familiar to him by then as the rooms of his own house. He remembers a long stretch of summers when local fishermen would stop by most evenings on their way back to harbor, exchanging a few words, sometimes a portion of their catch, for nothing more than the simple pleasure of conversation at the end of a long day. He remembers their names, most of them, though some have slipped quietly from memory over the years, the way names sometimes do, even names of people who once mattered very much. He remembers their boats, though, clearly, the particular shape and color of each one, growing as familiar to him over the years as the faces of old friends. He thinks of the way grief, when it eventually came for Margaret, settled into this place slowly, gently, the way fog settles, rather than arriving all at once like a storm. He remembers the months afterward when her absence was sharpest, the kitchen too quiet, the second chair too empty, the garden behind the house slowly overtaken by weeds he could not bring himself to pull, not yet, not for a long while. He remembers, eventually, finding a kind of peace in it, not because the grief left entirely, but because he learned, slowly, the way he had learned everything else in this life, to carry it gently, the way you might carry a small stone in your pocket, present, but no longer heavy enough to weigh down each step. He remembers, with particular warmth, the small dinner the village held for him last week, a modest gathering at the diner Margaret used to love, where neighbors he had known for decades stood up, one by one, to share small memories of his years at the Light. He remembers feeling, that evening, the quiet weight of having lived a life that mattered to people, even if he had never sought recognition for it, even if most of his work had been done alone, at night, unseen by anyone but the boats he guided safely home. He had gone to bed that night feeling, for the first time in a long while, entirely, fully content. The fog outside has thinned further still, the horizon now faintly visible, a soft gray line where the last of the night meets the first hint of morning. The foghorn has gone quiet, its work, for tonight, finished. The waves continue their slow, steady rhythm against the rocks, patient, unhurried, exactly as they have been for every one of the 10,000 nights Walter has sat in this chair. His breathing remains slow, and deep, and even. The lamp continues to turn above him, sweeping its warm light out across water now touched with the faintest hint of gray-blue dawn. Around. And around. And around. Deeper into sleep now, another memory drifts up, slow and soft as sea smoke. He remembers the spring a great blue heron took up residence on the rocks just below the lighthouse, standing motionless for hours at a time, waiting with a patience that rivaled even his own. He remembers watching it from the gallery some mornings, coffee in hand, the two of them keeping each other quiet company, neither needing to move, neither needing to speak. He remembers the day it finally caught a fish, the sudden, lightning strike of its beak breaking the long stillness, and how satisfied he had felt on its behalf, as though he too had been rewarded for a long morning's patience. He remembers Margaret's quilts, stitched slowly over many winters, each one telling its own small story in fabric. The blue one, made the year they were married. The green one, stitched the winter their first dog, a scruffy terrier named Skipper, came to live with them. The patchwork one, finished the year Margaret's mother passed, made from old dresses and aprons and curtains, every scrap holding a small memory. He still sleeps under that last one, some nights, when the house feels quieter than usual. Tonight, it waits for him upstairs, folded neatly at the foot of the bed. He thinks of Skipper now, the little terrier who used to patrol the rocks each morning with fierce devotion, barking at gulls twice his size, utterly certain of his own importance. He remembers how Skipper would wait at the base of the lighthouse stairs every evening, refusing to climb them himself, but unwilling to settle until Walter came back down. He remembers, too, the quiet, sad morning years later when Skipper did not wake up, curled in his usual spot by the stove, and how he and Margaret had buried him beneath the small apple tree behind the cottage, planted the same year they were married. The tree still bears fruit, every September, sweet and small and entirely its own. He remembers learning to bake bread, of all things, during a particularly long, quiet winter when supply boats came less often than usual. He remembers his early loaves, dense and uneven, and Margaret's patient encouragement, and the slow, gradual improvement that came only through repetition, only through doing the same simple task over and over until his hands finally understood what his mind had been trying to teach them. He remembers, eventually, baking a loaf so good that Margaret declared, laughing, that she might just keep him around after all. He had laughed too, and kissed the flour from her cheek, and felt, in that small kitchen, entirely and completely happy. A memory of the lighthouse service inspector's annual visits drifts in now, almost amusing in its specificity. He remembers the particular, brisk efficiency of Mr. Donnelly, who came every spring for nearly 20 years to inspect the lamp, the logbook, the general state of the grounds. He remembers how nervous those visits made him in his early years, and how, eventually, they became almost a pleasant ritual, an excuse for Margaret to bake something special, an opportunity to hear news from other lighthouses up and down the coast. He remembers Mr. Donnelly's retirement, some years back now, and the younger inspector who replaced him, eager and a little stiff, slowly learning, the way Walter himself had once slowly learned, that this work cannot be rushed. He remembers, with particular fondness, the small wooden boat he kept tied at the dock below, used mostly for the short trip into the village for supplies, but occasionally, on calm summer evenings, simply for the pleasure of being out on the water. He remembers rowing out at sunset some evenings, resting the oars, letting the boat drift gently while he watched the lighthouse from a distance, the lamp just beginning its evening work, sweeping its warm light out across water he himself was floating upon. There was something, he always thought, particularly satisfying about seeing his own work from the outside like that, however briefly. He thinks of the long, quiet process of learning to live well with solitude, something this work demanded of him from the very first year. He remembers how lonely the silence felt at first, how he filled it nervously with the radio, with constant small tasks, with anything that might keep the quiet at bay. He remembers, slowly, over months and years, learning instead to welcome the quiet, to let it settle into him the way fog settles over water, not something to escape, but something to simply exist alongside, peacefully, without struggle. He thinks now that this slow lesson, more than any other, prepared him well for tonight, for this last quiet evening, for whatever quiet evenings may yet remain for him beyond it. He remembers, too, small kindnesses received over the years, sacks of extra vegetables left at his dock by neighboring fishermen, a warm pie left on his doorstep by a village family after a particularly hard winter, a young sailor once mailing him a postcard from halfway around the world, simply to say thank you for a single safe passage years before. He has tried, in his own quiet way, to return such kindnesses wherever he could, and thinks, now, that perhaps this is the truest measure of a life well spent. Not grand achievements. Just small, steady kindnesses, given and received, across a great many ordinary days. Outside, the fog has thinned further still, and faint stars are beginning to show through the gaps, scattered and silver against the slowly softening sky. The waves below continue their unhurried rhythm against the rocks. The foghorn has gone quiet now, no longer needed as visibility improves, leaving only the steady, gentle sound of the sea itself. Walter sleeps on, undisturbed, his breathing slow and even, his face calm in the dim golden light cast by the lamp continuing its patient rotation above him. Far beneath sleep now, another memory rises, gentle and unhurried. He remembers the year the village built a small footbridge connecting the rocky point to the mainland path, making his walks into town easier on tired knees. He remembers the afternoon of its opening, a modest little ceremony with lemonade and bunting, children racing back and forth across the new planks while their parents looked on, laughing. He remembers feeling, that day, less like a man living apart from the village, and more like a quiet, permanent thread woven into its fabric, however far his lighthouse stood from its center. He remembers learning to identify the different boats that passed by sound alone, long before he could see them clearly through fog or darkness. The low chug of old Pete's lobster boat, slightly uneven from an engine that never quite ran true. The higher, smoother hum of the ferry that passed twice daily, full of summer visitors. The particular creak and slap of sailboats tacking against the wind on breezy afternoons. He remembers how proud he felt, in his middle years here, at how easily he could read the water and the air, the way another man might read a familiar book. A memory surfaces now of a particularly fierce nor'easter, the worst storm of his career, when waves broke clear over the rocks and reached nearly to the base of the tower itself. He remembers Margaret gripping his hand tightly as they watched from the kitchen window, the whole house seeming to shudder under each gust. He remembers climbing the stairs that night more times than he could count, checking and rechecking the lamp, refusing to let exhaustion win out over duty. He remembers, near dawn, when the storm finally broke, stepping outside into a world rearranged, driftwood scattered everywhere, the dock partially damaged, but the light, miraculously, undimmed. He remembers thinking, in that exhausted, grateful moment, that he had never loved this old lighthouse more than in that instant. He thinks of slower joys now, quieter ones. Afternoons spent simply sitting with Margaret on the porch, doing nothing in particular, watching boats pass, commenting occasionally on the weather, content in long stretches of comfortable silence. He remembers how rare such silences are between two people who do not know each other well, and how precious they become between two people who do. He and Margaret had built, over 40 years, an entire language of small glances and gestures, needing few words at all by the end to understand exactly what the other was thinking. He misses that silent understanding more than almost anything else, now that she is gone. He remembers, with a small smile, the year he and a few other local keepers organized a modest gathering, rowing or sailing to a small island roughly equidistant from each of their posts, sharing food and stories for one rare afternoon away from their duties. He remembers the particular kinship among keepers, a shared understanding of solitude and duty that few outside the profession ever fully grasped. He remembers, too, how each of them, without exception, found some excuse to leave a little early, eager to return to their own quiet posts, their own familiar lamps, as though even a few hours away felt like too long. He thinks of the long, gradual process by which a person comes to belong somewhere, not through dramatic moments, but through thousands of small, repeated acts. Lighting the lamp, writing the log, walking the same stretch of rocky shore each morning, greeting the same gulls, the same seals, the same slow tides, day after day, year after year, until the place is no longer simply where you live, but who you are. He thinks he understands this now in a way he could not have explained to his younger self, the eager 20-year-old who first climbed these stairs, nervous and unsure. He remembers, faintly now, a particular Easter morning, the whole village gathering on the beach at dawn for a small sunrise service, voices raised in quiet hymn against the sound of the waves. He remembers standing near the back, Margaret's hand in his, the lighthouse visible just behind them, its lamp finally dimming as the true sun rose to take over its work for the day. He remembers thinking, in that peaceful moment, that there was something fitting about a lighthouse standing watch nearby even during a celebration of light itself. A memory of late-night radio drifts in now, faint and crackling, the way the old shortwave used to bring in distant voices from up and down the coast. He remembers listening, some nights, to other keepers checking in with the mainland, voices calm and businesslike, reporting conditions, requesting supplies, exchanging brief pleasantries before signing off. He remembers the particular comfort of those voices, proof that he was not entirely alone out here, that a whole network of quiet, patient people were doing the same work as him, up and down hundreds of miles of coastline, each tending their own small point of light. He thinks, hazily now, of the very concept of a lighthouse itself, how strange and beautiful an idea it has always seemed to him, that people would build such structures purely for the benefit of strangers they would never meet. No reward expected. No thanks required. Just a light, left burning, for whoever might need it. He thinks this is, perhaps, the simplest and best definition of kindness he has ever encountered, and that he has been fortunate, beyond measure, to spend his whole life inside it. The stars outside have grown clearer still, scattered thick across the now mostly fog-free sky. The sea has calmed further, its waves now barely more than ripples against the rocks. Walter sleeps on, peaceful and undisturbed, his chest rising and falling slowly beneath his old wool sweater, his hands resting loose and open in his lap. The lamp continues turning above him, faithful as ever, sweeping its warm light out across the quiet water. Around. And around. And around. In the deepest part of sleep now, the memories grow softer still, less like distinct stories and more like a slow, warm tide washing gently over him. He remembers the particular weight of the old brass key to the lamp room, worn smooth by decades of hands, his own included, and how it always felt cool against his palm on warm summer mornings, and strangely warm on the coldest winter nights, as though the metal itself had absorbed something of the work it had witnessed. He remembers polishing that key occasionally, not because it needed it, but because the small act of care felt good, felt like respect for a tool that had served him so faithfully for so long. He remembers a quiet conversation with Margaret, late one summer evening, about whether they had ever regretted choosing this isolated life over one closer to family, closer to the conveniences of town. He remembers her answer, simple and certain, not for a single day. He remembers feeling the same, and saying so, and the comfortable silence that followed, two people entirely at peace with the shape their life had taken, however unconventional it may have seemed to others. A memory rises now of teaching himself to identify birds, slowly, over many seasons, using an old field guide Margaret had given him one Christmas. He remembers the particular satisfaction of finally identifying a bird he had watched for years without a name, a black guillemot, as it turned out, common enough along this coast, but new to him in that moment, a small private discovery in a life full of such small private discoveries. He remembers keeping a quiet list, over the years, of every species he had identified from the lighthouse, the list growing slowly, patiently, the way everything in his life seemed to grow. He remembers the warm, golden light of late August afternoons, when the whole coastline seemed to slow down even further than usual, the village quiet, the tourists mostly gone, the water calm and clear and faintly cooler than it had been in July. He remembers these as some of his favorite days, neither the urgency of summer nor the stillness of winter, but something in between, a season of gentle transition he came to treasure more with each passing year. He thinks of the small wooden box on his dresser upstairs, containing what little he has collected over the years, a smooth stone from the beach where he and Margaret first met, a pressed flower from her wedding bouquet, a child's drawing of the lighthouse given to him by a visiting family decades ago, his father's old pocket watch, stopped now, but kept anyway, simply for the comfort of its weight in his hand. Small things. Quiet things. The accumulated evidence of a life lived slowly, and well. He remembers, faintly now, the particular sound of Margaret's sewing machine, a steady, rhythmic hum from the next room on quiet evenings, accompanying whatever book he happened to be reading by lamplight. He remembers how that sound, more than almost any other, came to mean home to him, the small mechanical rhythm blending with the larger rhythms of waves and wind and the slow turning lamp above, all of it together forming the particular music of his life here. A memory drifts up now of the very last conversation he and Margaret shared, quiet and unremarkable in the way that final conversations so often are, neither of them knowing it would be the last. She had asked him, simply, if he was happy. He remembers answering yes, without hesitation, and asking the same of her. She had smiled, and said yes as well, and reached for his hand the way she always did, and they had sat together in comfortable silence, watching the lamp turn through the window, until it was time for bed. He holds that memory gently now, grateful, beyond words, that it was such a peaceful one. He thinks of Claire again, briefly, the young woman who will climb these same stairs tomorrow evening, who will light this same lamp, who will begin writing her own long, slow story into the pages of a brand new logbook. He hopes she finds here what he found, not excitement, not adventure in any dramatic sense, but something quieter and, he has come to believe, far more valuable, a life with room enough in it for patience, and attention, and the simple, steady work of caring for something larger than himself. He thinks she will do well. He thinks the light is in good hands. The night has grown very still now, the wind entirely calm, the sea barely murmuring against the rocks below. The stars overhead burn steady and clear, undimmed by any remaining trace of fog. Walter sleeps on, deeply, peacefully, his last night in this chair drawing slowly, gently, toward its quiet end. The lamp continues its faithful rotation above him, sweeping its warm light out across calm, dark water, exactly as it has every night for 40 years, exactly as it will continue to do long after he is gone. Around. And around. And around. Far down in sleep now, the memories come slower still, drifting like loose fragments of driftwood on a calm tide. He remembers the particular hush of the lighthouse in the hour just before dawn, a quality of silence found at no other time of day, when even the gulls seem to hold their voices, waiting for the first light to give them permission to begin their calling again. He remembers loving that hour above almost any other, the sense of standing at the very edge of something, the old night not quite finished, the new day not quite arrived. He remembers a particular friend, a retired sea captain named Henry who used to row over from the village most Sunday afternoons, simply to sit and talk, two old men comparing notes on weather and tides and the slow accumulation of years. He remembers Henry's stories, tall and exaggerated and utterly delightful, and how Margaret used to roll her eyes fondly at the wilder ones, never quite believing, never quite disbelieving either. He remembers Henry's funeral, some years back now, held at the small church in the village, and how strange it had felt afterward, those quiet Sunday afternoons suddenly empty of his old friend's booming laugh. He thinks of him fondly now, gratefully, the way you think of all the good company you have been lucky enough to keep along the way. He remembers learning, slowly and through considerable trial and error, to read the particular signs that preceded a storm along this stretch of coast, the way the gulls would fly low and silent, the way the air would grow strangely still and heavy, the particular color the sky would take on, a sickly green-gray unlike any other. He remembers trusting these signs over even the official weather reports in his later years, his own accumulated knowledge proving, time and again, more reliable than anything broadcast from the mainland. He thinks there is a kind of wisdom that can only be earned slowly, through decades of careful attention, and he is grateful to have spent his life acquiring exactly that kind. A memory rises now of teaching Margaret to fish from the rocks below, early in their marriage, her laughing in frustration at her tangled line, refusing his help, determined to master it herself. He remembers, eventually, the triumphant afternoon she caught her first fish, a small flounder, barely worth keeping, but celebrated that evening with as much ceremony as if she had landed a prize marlin. He remembers that fish, cooked simply with butter and lemon, tasting better than any meal he could recall before or since, simply for the joy and pride that had gone into catching it. He thinks of the many letters he wrote over the years to his sister, who lived inland, in a small town neither of them had ever found reason to leave for the other's sake. He remembers her letters in return, full of news from a world that felt, increasingly as the years passed, gently distant from his own, full of children growing up, of small-town politics, of ordinary cares that seemed, from this quiet point of rock and water, almost impossibly far away. He remembers loving her letters anyway, grateful for the thread of connection they maintained across all those miles, all those years. He remembers, with particular tenderness, the year he and Margaret finally got electricity reliably installed in the keeper's cottage, after years of oil lamps and careful rationing. He remembers her delight at her first electric kettle, the way she marveled, half joking, half sincere, at how quickly the water boiled compared to the old stovetop method. He remembers thinking, even then, how strange it was that the wider world's conveniences arrived here so slowly, so gradually, as though even progress itself understood that this place preferred its own unhurried pace. A memory of late autumn drifts in now, the particular smell of wood smoke and salt air mingling on a cold evening, the first fire of the season crackling in the small stove, Margaret's knitting needles clicking softly as she worked on a new scarf. He remembers these early autumn evenings as some of the coziest of the whole year, the harshness of winter not yet arrived, but its promise already present in the crispness of the air, a season of gentle anticipation he came to treasure deeply over the years. He thinks now of all the storms he weathered here, more than he could ever properly count, each one different, each one teaching him something new about patience, about preparation, about the particular calm that comes from having done everything within your power and simply trusting the rest to the sea itself. He remembers that no storm ever lasted as long as it felt like it would in the moment, and that calm water always returned, eventually, the way it always does, the way it will again tomorrow morning, and the morning after that, for as long as this lighthouse continues to stand. The sky outside has grown noticeably paler now along the very edge of the horizon, the deepest black of midnight giving way, slowly, to the first hints of approaching dawn, still hours away, but beginning, gently, to make its presence known. The sea remains calm, barely rippling beneath the steady sweep of the lamp. Walter sleeps on, undisturbed, his breathing slow and deep, his face peaceful in the warm golden light. Deeper still into the quiet dark of sleep, another memory surfaces, as unhurried as the tide that carries it. He remembers the summer a young painter came to stay in the village for several weeks, setting up her easel on the rocks below the lighthouse most mornings, working slowly, pausing often, squinting at the light the way Walter himself sometimes squinted at the horizon, reading something in it that only long practice could teach you to see. He remembers her bringing him one of her finished paintings as a farewell gift before she left for the winter, a small canvas showing the lighthouse at dusk, its lamp just beginning to glow against a pale violet sky. He remembers how strange and moving it was to see his own home through someone else's eyes, rendered with care and attention by a person who had looked at it, really looked at it, in a way he himself perhaps no longer could, so familiar had it become to him. That painting hangs in the kitchen still, just to the left of the window, where the morning light catches it at a particular angle that always makes the painted lamp seem almost to glow. He remembers the year a family of foxes denayed in the scrub grass behind the cottage, their kits venturing out each evening to tumble over each other in the dying light while their mother watched from a cautious distance. He remembers sitting very still on the back step some evenings, barely breathing, watching them play, the lighthouse lamp beginning its slow rotation behind him, the foxes paying it no mind at all. He remembers how that felt, being trusted by wild things, being still enough and quiet enough that the world simply continued around him as though he were part of the landscape itself. He had always aspired, in a private way, to exactly that kind of stillness. A memory drifts in now of a late June evening when the sea was so perfectly calm it reflected the sky like a mirror, every cloud, every color, every fading star doubled in the water below. He remembers standing on the gallery at the top of the tower that evening and feeling, for a brief, vertiginous moment, as though he were suspended between two skies, one above and one below, the lighthouse its own small island between them. He remembers the feeling passing as quickly as it came, replaced by something quieter and steadier, simply the pleasure of being present in a beautiful moment, neither trying to hold it nor letting it go. He thinks of the slow, seasonal rhythm that ordered his life here over 40 years, more reliable than any clock, more comforting than any calendar. The return of the ospreys each April, their nests rebuilt with patient precision on the same old channel markers year after year. The first summer fog rolling in off the water in June, cool and gray and smelling of deep ocean. The maples turning in September, their reflections burning briefly gold in the harbor below. The first hard frost of November, silencing the crickets, stilling the mosquitoes, bringing with it a particular crystalline quality to the air that he had come to associate with gratitude and rest. He remembers the quiet ceremony, held privately between himself and Margaret, that they observed every year on the anniversary of their arrival at the Lighthouse, a simple dinner of whatever was freshest from the garden or the sea, a glass of wine if they had it, a walk along the rocky shore afterward, reviewing the year behind them with honesty and affection. He remembers these anniversaries as among the most grounding rituals of his whole life, a yearly reminder of all they had chosen, and all they continue to choose, in staying. He thinks of the Lighthouse logbook now, the new one that sits ready and empty on the shelf, waiting for Claire's first entry tomorrow evening. He remembers the weight and pleasure of beginning a new logbook himself over the years, the clean, blank pages full of potential, the first line written with a slightly more careful hand than all the lines that would follow. He hopes Claire will find the same quiet satisfaction in that ritual that he always did, the same sense of participating in something larger and longer than any single night, any single season, any single keeper's tenure. A memory of winter stars floats up now, the way they appeared on the clearest, coldest January nights, impossibly bright and numerous, the whole dome of the sky ablaze with them, their light reflecting in long silver shimmers on the dark water below. He remembers how those nights always made him feel simultaneously very small and very much at peace, the vastness of the sky somehow comforting rather than overwhelming, perhaps because the lighthouse lamp beside him always seemed to answer the stars in its own small, steady way. A light among lights. Patient and purposeful. Shining simply because that was what it was built to do. He thinks of sleep now, true and deep sleep, the kind that comes only when the mind has finished its long evening of wandering and is finally, gratefully, ready to rest. He thinks of the softness of the chair beneath him, the warmth of his old wool sweater, the faint sound of the sea outside, steady and reassuring as a heartbeat. He thinks of nothing, after that. Just the warmth. Just the slow sound of water. Just the steady turning of the lamp above, sweeping its light out across the quiet dark, around and around, as it has always done, as it will always do, faithful and unhurried and entirely, perfectly constant. Outside, the sky has shifted another shade toward morning, the horizon now holding the faintest suggestion of gray-blue where, in a few hours, the sun will begin to rise. The sea is glassy and still, its surface barely disturbed by the lightest of breezes moving in off the water. A single gull passes in silence far above, heading somewhere unhurried. Walter does not stir. He sleeps on, deeply and completely, as peacefully as a man can sleep who has nothing left undone, nothing left unsaid, nothing left to tend to until morning. The lamp turns above him. Around. And around. And around. In the very deepest part of sleep now, the memories no longer arrive as stories with beginnings and ends, but as sensations, as fragments of warmth and light and sound, drifting through him like slow currents through deep water. He remembers the smell of the sea at low tide, a rich, ancient smell of salt and seaweed, and something older still, the smell of the ocean floor briefly revealed before the water returns to cover it again. He remembers learning to love that smell, strange and unfamiliar at first, then gradually, over months and years, becoming so woven into his sense of home that he could not now imagine a morning without it. He remembers the particular comfort of routine, the way the same small tasks performed in the same order each evening created a kind of architecture around his days, a reliable structure within which everything else could be uncertain without feeling unstable. The lamp at dusk. The log after. The kettle on the stove. The chair by the window. He thinks that perhaps this is the deepest gift this life gave him, not the solitude, not the beauty, not even the purpose, but the simple, daily practice of doing the same faithful things, over and over, with care, for 40 years. A memory rises now, warm and golden, of the summer he and Margaret hosted her youngest sister and her family for 2 full weeks, the cottage suddenly full of noise and children and laughter, quite unlike anything it usually contained. He remembers feeling, at first, slightly overwhelmed by the disruption to his careful routines, and then, gradually, delighted by it, the children's curiosity about the lighthouse reminding him to see it fresh again through their eyes. He remembers the eldest boy, no more than 8, who declared that when he grew up he would be a lighthouse keeper too, his voice full of the absolute certainty that only very young children can summon. He remembers smiling at that, and hoping, in a quiet way, that the boy had found some version of it. He thinks of the way light behaves differently on the water at different times of day and season, something he has had 40 years to study and never once grown tired of. The flat silver of a gray winter morning. The deep, trembling gold of a summer afternoon. The quick, brilliant sparkle of a windy spring day when every tiny wave catches the sun and throws it back like scattered diamonds. The soft, pink copper shimmer of early evening, when the water seems to glow from within rather than merely reflecting the sky above. He has never once looked out at this water and seen exactly the same thing twice. He thinks, drowsily, that he never will. He remembers a conversation he had once with a young man who had come to the lighthouse asking for directions, a hiker who had strayed from the coastal trail and ended up on the rocks below, looking confused and slightly embarrassed. He remembers inviting him in for coffee, showing him the map, pointing out the trail markers he had missed. He remembers the young man looking around the lighthouse kitchen before he left, taking in the old logbooks, the worn chair, the view of the water, and saying, simply and sincerely, that it seemed like a very good life. He remembers saying, equally simply, that it was. A memory of Margaret's voice drifts in now, not any particular conversation, Just the sound of it, warm and familiar, moving through the small rooms of the cottage on an ordinary evening, talking to herself as she worked, or reading aloud from whatever book she happened to be in the middle of, a habit he had always loved, even when he was only half listening. He thinks, in this drowsy moment, that the thing he misses most is not any grand moment or milestone, but simply the sound of another person moving through the same small space, the background music of a shared life, so constant for so long that its absence still sometimes surprises him, even now, even years later. He remembers taking up watercolor painting himself for a brief period, inspired by the young painter who had visited all those years ago, buying a small set of paints and a pad of thick paper and attempting, with more enthusiasm than skill, to capture the view from the gallery at different times of day. He remembers his results as earnest and clumsy and entirely charming, Margaret hanging them on the cottage walls with entirely straight faces and entirely unjustified praise. He had eventually returned the brushes to their box, content to leave serious painting to those with more talent, but grateful for the few weeks of cheerful, unsuccessful effort. He thinks, drifting now, of all the nights this lamp has turned without his watching it, all the ships it has guided home without his knowing, all the small acts of usefulness it has performed in the dark while he slept, unaware, in the chair below. He finds this thought, somehow, deeply comforting. The light doing its work whether or not he is watching. The world continuing its patient turning whether or not any single person is awake to observe it. He thinks this is, perhaps, the most peaceful thing he knows. That the important things go on. That the light keeps turning. That the sea keeps moving. That the morning, when it finally comes, will come whether or not he has lain awake worrying about it. The sky outside is noticeably lighter now along the horizon, a deep, soft indigo beginning to warm at its lowest edge toward something approaching gray. The birds have not yet begun, but somewhere very faint, very far away, the first tentative note of a waking robin floats across the stillness, barely audible, more promise than sound. Walter does not hear it. He sleeps on, deeper than ever, his face entirely still, his hands loose and open in his lap, the last keeper of this lighthouse resting in his last night here with all the ease of a man who has nothing left to carry. The lamp continues its slow, faithful rotation above him. Around. And around. And around. Now, in the very softest, most weightless part of sleep, the memories come not as images at all, but as feelings, as textures, as the warmth of a familiar hand, the smell of wood smoke and salt, the sound of water moving over stone. He remembers, without quite remembering, the feeling of being young and new here, everything still sharp and uncertain and full of potential. He remembers, without quite remembering, the long middle years, steady and full, built from thousands of ordinary days stacked one upon the other like stones in a well-made wall. He remembers, without quite remembering, the quieter years after Margaret, when the cottage held her absence like a second kind of presence, familiar and gentle and slowly, over time, simply part of the texture of the place. All of it together now, no longer separate chapters but a single long, continuous thing, a life, whole and unhurried, shaped by this small stretch of rock and water and sky. He remembers, hazily, a walk he took with Margaret one October evening along the furthest point of the rocky shore, the two of them picking their way carefully over the wet stones as the tide came in around them. He remembers her finding a piece of sea glass, smoothed and frosted by years of tumbling in the surf, holding it up to the last of the evening light, turning it slowly in her fingers. He remembers the color of it, pale and green, the color of shallow ocean water on a clear day. He remembers she put it in her coat pocket, and he never saw it again, and he thinks, sometimes, that it is still there, in the pocket of that old gray coat hanging in the hall, waiting quietly to be found. A memory drifts up now of the long, unhurried lunches he and Henry used to share on calm Sunday afternoons, the two of them talking easily about nothing of particular importance, weather and tides and old boats and older stories, the afternoon stretching out around them with the particular generosity that Sunday afternoons along the coast always seemed to possess. He remembers how those lunches always ended the same way, with Henry pushing back from the table and saying, "Well, I suppose I ought to be getting back," and then neither of them moving for another half hour, the conversation finding one more thing to settle before they could bring themselves to end it. He smiles, faintly, in his sleep. He thinks of the tide now, specifically of the way it returns, always, without fail, without hurry, without any apparent concern for the hours it has been away. Out and back. Out and back. He thinks there is no better teacher of patience in all the world than the tides, and that 40 years of living beside them has made him, he hopes, at least a passable student. He remembers, with a warmth that reaches even into the deepest part of sleep, the morning after each big storm, when he would walk the shoreline and collect whatever the sea had brought in during the night. Driftwood, mostly, worn smooth and pale by its long journey. Occasionally a lost buoy, bright orange, far from wherever it had started. Once, memorably, an entire wooden lobster trap, perfectly intact, as though the sea had simply decided it was done with it and left it neatly on the rocks for collection. He remembers the particular pleasure of those mornings, the air washed clean, the light unusually sharp and clear, the whole coastline rearranged slightly by the storm into something new and familiar at once. He thinks of the logbook one more time, his final entry, those 4 quiet words written in his careful hand. All is well. He thinks that a person could spend a whole life searching for the right words and never find 4 better ones. All is well. He lets them drift through him now like the tide, steady and true, washing over everything, leaving it clean and still. All is well. All is well. All is well. Outside, the horizon has brightened further, a thin line of pale gold beginning to trace itself along the edge of the world, barely visible, barely there, the very first suggestion of a dawn still hours away. The sea continues its long, slow conversation with the shore, the same conversation it has been having for longer than anyone alive can remember, patient and unhurried and entirely unconcerned with the passing of any single night. The birds are stirring now, very faintly, somewhere far off in the pines behind the cottage, the first quiet murmurings of a world beginning slowly to wake. And Walter sleeps on. Deeply. Peacefully. The way a man sleeps who has kept faith with the things that mattered to him, who has done his work quietly and well, who has loved and been loved in return, who has sat in the same chair beside the same window and watched the same lamp turn for 40 faithful years. The way a man sleeps when he is entirely, simply, at rest. The lamp continues its slow rotation above him, as it has every night of his 40 years here, as it will continue long after he has gone. Around. And around. And around. Its warm light sweeps out over water that is growing gradually paler, gradually calmer, gradually softer in the very first gray light of a new morning. There is nothing left to do tonight. Nothing left to tend. Nothing left to worry over. Just the warmth of the old chair beneath you. Just the soft sound of the water outside. Just the steady, unhurried turning of the light. Around. And around. And around. Let your breathing slow, just a little more. Let your hands rest where they are. Let the memories and the half-thoughts drift past like driftwood on a calm tide, not holding on to any of them, just letting them come and letting them go, easy and gentle as the sea itself. You are safe. You are warm. There is nowhere else you need to be tonight. Just here. Just this slow, steady light. Just the sound of the waves, soft and constant, carrying you gently, gently, deeper into sleep. Around. And around. And around. Asterisk, end of narration. Allow ambient ocean sounds, waves, distant foghorn, light wind, to continue for remainder of video runtime. Fade volume gradually over 10 to 15 minutes until only the softest wave sounds remain. Asterisk. The tea has gone warm and gentle in his hands. Outside, the foghorn sounds again, further away now, or perhaps it is simply that the room has grown quieter. The lamp continues to turn. Around. And around. A slow, steady rhythm, like a heartbeat, like breathing, like the tide. Walter's eyes close. Just for a moment, he tells himself. Just to rest. The waves continue their soft work against the rocks below, patient and unhurried, the way they have for thousands of years, the way they will for thousands more. The fog settles gently around the lighthouse. The light keeps turning. Around. And around. Hours pass. The sky outside begins, almost imperceptibly, to change. The deep black softens to navy. The navy softens to gray. Somewhere far out on the water, the faintest line of gold begins to trace itself along the horizon. Walter sleeps on in his chair, his tea long since gone cold beside him, the logbook closed on the table, his last night drawing softly, peacefully, to an end. The light continues to turn, slow and steady, sweeping out across calm water. Around. And around. And around. There is nowhere else you need to be tonight. Just here. Just this slow, steady light. Just the sound of the waves, drifting you gently, gently, into sleep.